Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. It's David Summers hosting another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. This is the story of wrestling in America as told by the stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. So now let's step back into the ring and back into time. We get wall to wall and treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller, hanging out in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. Hey Rod, what's going on? Living the good life up there.
Oh man, doing good. Everything's pretty cool, a little bit warm, but it's that time of year, and it's a lot better than some places in the country. I see that.
Oh, you bet. When we were in Death Valley a few years ago, it was 115 degrees. Yesterday, I saw that it was only 128.
Oh.
So, and when you step out in Death Valley, it really does. It's crazy when they say it feels like you're in an oven. Well, it did. Absolutely, it did. I can't imagine what it's like there now. Hey, Ron, let me ask, can we start today with the fact I listened to your Ask the Stud 7 question and answer show on YouTube Southeastern Rewind a couple of days ago. Then I saw the title for this Studcast, so I have to ask you three different questions that I've jotted down to come up with to get this thing started. Were you the only professional wrestling company owner in the world in 1979 going through a wrestling war?
Yeah, to my knowledge, Dave, yes, I think I was, probably, yes.
Okay, all right. Looking back, do you think that having more than one territory had anything to do with all the problems that you were encountering in an extremely busy 1979?
Well, man, honestly, in looking back, I'd have to say that many of the bad things that happened would not have happened if I had not had 2 territories at the same time. So I guess my answer then to that one is yes. And trying to run 2 territories separately at the same time, I believe at this point it was a mistake.
All right. So my last question is, was there a better way to have done it that would have been more successful from the beginning? Have you thought about it that way?
Well, man, I think the answer to that one is easy, but I didn't make it happen until 1985. I'd kind of pieced it all together, and the answer was called Continental Championship Wrestling. After that 1979 failure led to my selling one of the 2 territories. That took me 6 years for me to build it back again to those original 2 territories, to the old Gulf Coast, and then adding Knoxville back. That process actually started in 1980 when we added Birmingham and all of northern Alabama and the deal with Nick Goulas. And then it finished with that triumphant return in 1985 to Tennessee and back into Kentucky.
All right. Now, that's an amazing story right there in and of itself. Selling one territory in 1979, returning 6 years later with one of the biggest wrestling companies in the world. There's a lot more Studcast in finishing that story. I know that's got to be the case. All right. So the title for this Studcast, number 308. This is number 308. I mentioned seeing it earlier. It's called Record Crowd Becomes Disaster. All right, so I can't wait to find out exactly what you meant by that. So where do we get started and where do we ride first today?
Well, man, as we've talked about being in 1979 here, there's just no end to the problems, man, of owning two territories. You just mentioned that question earlier. The 1979 was such a struggle for the entire year. This title kind of refers to the southeastern Gulf Coast territory, but the southeastern Knoxville territory was not much different than that. There were challenges everywhere, man. And obviously, it's kind of a oxymoron. I think that's the term for it. A record crowd. How can a record crowd become disaster? So I think we're going to figure that out, and we're going to talk about that in this one. We're going to start riding today in the Gulf Coast territory, where one major city was going to set their all-time record attendance, and with that, something that should have been a great night for me turned into a disaster instead. And all because I couldn't be in two places at one time. So we're going to break down the all-time record Dothan, Alabama crowd and card, which was in a football stadium, Hughes football stadium, on a Friday night, July 27, 1979. We're going to talk about the fantastic TV show that promoted it. Because it was such a great card, we had all kinds of stars on it. We'll talk about the results of that card, the attendance for that event, and the disaster that it became and why it became a disaster. And then we're going to ride south in the Knoxville territory, where at this point we're lost for the first time ever an entire event in the last Studcast due to a storm that forced the cancellation of the match in the amphitheater. So more than just an event, it was maybe the best event of the year that we lost, as a matter of fact. So coming off that disaster, we're going to find out how we followed that card. We'll talk about the TV that promoted that one, the results of the card, and the attendance. And on Friday, July 27th, on the same night, bear in mind, this match that we're talking about in Knoxville is on the same night as the record-breaking crowd in Dothan, Alabama's match.
Wow.
So we're also going to take a look at the next attempt from the All-Stars to do anything they can to gain attention. They never got enough time left after all that, Dave. We're going to shoot for another learning tree question.
Well, I tell you what, you better start shooting because this is going to be a loaded Studcast. No doubt about that. Following a disaster last week in the Tennessee territory with a record crowd in one Gulf Coast city that turns into another disaster in the Gulf Coast territory this week. All right, you said we would open up with the Gulf Coast territory this week. So how about Friday, July 27th, 1979, a spectacular card. I wish I would have given anything to been at this show in Dothan, Alabama, Rip Hughes Stadium, that produced the largest crowd ever to see a wrestling event in our fair city. Tell us about that.
Well, man, it was a 7-match card. It had 4 championship matches on this card. Wow, this was a tremendous card. The opening match was Eddie Sullivan, managed by Billy Spears, versus one of the very young and talented brothers that came out of Columbus, Georgia, Ted Oates. Then the returning assassin, Randy Colley, who had just shown up last week again, was facing a fan favorite at this point, Herb Calvert. It was a pretty big star there at this point. Fans really liked him. Although he never got into many main events, he was a good opening match and a first 2 or 3 match guy on the card. Ox Baker was returning from Japan on this event and meeting a newcomer out of the Gulf Coast, man. One that you're going to be very familiar with, who's also going to become a star down there in the Gulf Coast. Crusher Blackwell is being sent from Knoxville down south. And in the first of 4 title matches for the Southeastern Tag Championship, the champion Samoans, managed by Billy Spears, going to be defending against the Dargon twins, making another appearance. And I think this was their last one, but could be maybe another one or two. And then for the Southeastern TV Championship, the defending champion, Ron Slinker, was going to be facing Jerry Brisco.
Wow.
And in the next match, the former NWA World Champion, Jerry's brother Jack Brisco, was going after the belt of the Southeastern champion, Austin Idol. And the main event was for the NWA World Championship, Harley Race versus Terry the Hug Boulder.
Man, that's amazing. You've got both of the Brisco brothers for that, and I think you said 4 championship title matches. Absolutely incredible card. A former and present NWA World Champion, as we said, 4 title matches, plus Ox Baker against Crusher Blackwell, a who's who of American wrestling right there in one night. I can only imagine what was on the TV to set up and really promote this card.
Well, this TV, Dave, obviously was done differently than the one we did about 3 weeks earlier on the 4th of July event in Mobile. On that TV, we basically had 2 different shows for the 3 Gulf Coast TV markets. One, we did 2 different personality profiles. We did not show some interviews from the stars that were not going to be appearing in Montgomery and Dothan and in Mobile only. So this time we did it differently because Harley Race, the NWA World Champion, was only appearing in one southeastern city. He'd been appearing in 2 or 3 cities pretty regularly, but he came just for this World Championship match against the Hawk. And because this match was with an opponent, Terry the Hawk Boulder, that had beaten him in the middle of the ring 9 weeks earlier in Dothan, and because that opponent in the last 9 weeks had become a huge star since that win, and because we felt like, Louie and I, that we could and we wanted to try to draw fans from all over the territory for this huge event.
I mean, to me, that makes a lot of sense, but why were you making it a territory-wide event? What does that really mean?
Well, because the other 2 markets weren't really that far away from Dothan when you think about it. The idea was to kind of draw fans from the entire territory. And it really helped that this event obviously was on a weekend night, Friday night. Mobile and Columbus, Georgia, as an example, were both just about a little over 2 hours from Dothan drive. Montgomery and Pensacola were only about an hour and a half from Dothan. And Panama City and Tallahassee were only about an hour from Dothan. So, we were just felt like because all those cities were covered by our TVs, that we might be able to pull some fans from all of them.
All right, I get it. All right, so what was on the TV show that promoted this territory-wide event?
Well, it opened with the Southeastern champion, Austin Idol, Charlie Platt. They were at the set, and they watched an interview right off, recorded from the Florida territory, which was basically Tampa, the home of Jack Brisco. And Jack talked all about this upcoming Southeastern Championship match against Austin Idol. And then when that finished, Idol went to the ring, and he got himself another win. So it opens up with Jack Brisco, former world champion. Idol gets himself a win. Second match segment opened up with Ron Slinker, who was the TV champion. And he was defending his TV trophy on this card, on this TV. We actually had a TV championship match as well as all the rest of this big card. And he was defending against the Gladiator, Ron Slinker. The match ended in about a 15-minute, it went one of those 15-minute time limit draws. Slinker, once the match was over, went to the set with Charlie, and he watched another interview from the Florida territory. And this time, it was with Jerry Brisco. And he was going to be, wrestling Slinker on the big card. He talked about, being the TV champion, Southeastern would be a big feather in his cap, Jerry. And he said, then this match was going to be a no time limit. Wasn't going to have a 15-minute time limit on it because it was held outside in a big event. Then the personality profile had Terry the Hog Boulder, man, watching his spectacular win on May 25th, 1979. 63 days earlier, he beat the NWA World Champion, Harley Race, right in the middle of the ring. And then on that night, I was scheduled to be the challenger for the title, but I got hurt out there basically trying to help the Hulk because he was getting beat up by Ox Baker, the Samoans, and Billy Spears, all of Billy Spears' troop. And so right before that title match, my match was next for the championship. Ox Baker hit me with a hard punch.
Uh-oh.
I wasn't able to go head back to the ring to wrestle Harley, and I was given the task of picking who I wanted to take my place, and there stood the big old Hulk, man. And Harley said he would defend the title, and then when the Hulk went to the ring, Harley took the belt back to the dressing room, came back and said, "No, I'm not going to wrestle him for the belt. I don't have a contract, and he's not going to get a shot at the belt." And obviously, the Hulk beat him. So that video was followed by an interview from Harley about the Hulk's first ever title shot for the NWA belt. I don't know that it wasn't his only title shot, as a matter of fact, because the Hulk, I think, went from there on into New York. He went and worked in AWA. I don't know that he ever got another shot at the NWA belt other than this particular night.
Wow. All right, so with all the different interviews and classic videos, like Hulk beating, the classic videos rather, like Hulk Hogan beating Harley Race, this was becoming one of the best TVs ever. So how did it finish up?
Well, man, it finished up just as strong as it started, I think. The fans got their first look at 425-pound Crusher Blackwell. And his opponent, Ox Baker, went to the set with Charlie. Ox Baker had never seen Crusher Blackwell wrestle, and he's told that to Charlie. They discussed it, and Charlie had never seen Crusher Blackwell on this particular day. And Crusher left Ox Baker kind of speechless, man, because, with him being 425 pounds, he hit his opponent with a drop kick with both feet in the face, and then went up on the top rope and jumped off on him. He literally crushed him. He became Crusher Blackwell right then. He crushed that guy.
That is amazing. That is amazing.
And Ox Baker had no words.
Wow. Yeah, I guess.
So then the TV ended with the Southeastern Tag Champions, the Samoans. And obviously, as they had always done, man, they just demolished two young wrestlers. There was very few guys that could compete with them. And then before they had another problem with their manager. They had been having these problems for about 3 weeks with Billy Spears. And they almost lost, they had a problem with Spears again. And they had a problem the week before where they almost lost a match on TV. So the giant Dargon twins, they went to the set with Charlie, and they watched these guys wrestle, the Samoans. They had yet to be in the ring with the Samoans. And, wow, they were as speechless as Ox Baker had been about the Blackwell match after watching what the Samoans did to the boys they were in the ring with.
Wow. All right, that's a great TV right there, especially in the July rating period on top of that. 2 NWA champions on it, the Southeastern TV champion, the Southeastern Heavyweight champion, the Southeastern Tag champions, and Crusher Blackwell's debut. Did I miss anything? I mean, that had to be one of the best TV shows ever. So what about the results of this card?
Well, Eddie Sullivan beat Ted Oates in the first match. The Assassin won over Herb Calvert. Charlie Platt told me one of the best matches of the night on that night was Crusher Blackwell versus Ox Baker. And that match ended up in a double disqualification. First time these guys had ever wrestled each other, both of them end up bleeding, and both of them end up disqualified. So there's going to be a lot of future here in the match between those guys for sure. Then the Samoans beat the Dargon twins, but they had to do it without the help of their manager, And what happened after the match was over kind of changed everything for this team, and actually for Southeastern. So the Samoans had almost lost again because of Billy Spears, as the Dargon twins, man, got the heck beat out of them basically, and they both ended up getting carried from the ring. The huge Samoans, man, took out their anger on the hottest heel in the territory. And you know who that was? It was Billy Spears. And those two guys jumped on Billy Spears, and they did everything they could to hurt him, man. And they became baby faces in the process. The fans went nuts. They were like, wow, this is great. They're going to kill Billy Spears. So Billy Spears got carried from the ring that night, and he never returned to Southeastern Wrestling again.
Wow. So say goodnight to Billy Spears. Are you kidding, Stud? They ended his career that night. All right. So what was that all about? I mean, was that in the plans?
Well, as with so many crazy things going on in my life at that time, this may be one of the craziest stories yet. Billy Spears and Austin Idol had never met before. Before Idol arrived in the territory. Idol had been there for about 10 weeks. And for some reason, and I don't know this, but I do know that this is what actually happened, Spears had developed this hatred for Austin Idol. Both of them were heels. They're in the same dressing room all the time. Something happened between those two guys. Spears got so upset and hated him so much that without knowing it, he approached an undercover police officer paid him to beat Idol up. Right? So Spears paid a police officer, not knowing he was a police officer, to beat up Austin Idol. Spears got sent to jail and booked and sent to jail. And at that point, we had no choice but to let him go. I mean, couldn't do anything with him after that. Can't put him in the dressing room with Austin Idol for sure.
All right, wait.
And I guess our two big Samoans took care of the job for us.
All right, you just made that all up, didn't you, Ron?
I couldn't make up a story that weird.
Wow.
Bear in mind, man, it was 1979, and anything could happen. In fact, anything was happening. It was just a horrible, horrible year. So then we had the second assassin from 1978 coming in to join the one that was already here on this card. And they needed a top team to work with. So we used Billy Spears, man, and his red hot heat to turn the Samoans babyface. We needed, a second assassin's coming. We don't need two heel teams. So all of a sudden, they beat the heck out of Spears. They become baby faces, and we've got two major great teams that are going to be handling business down there in the Gulf Coast.
Wow. All right. So far, a pretty crazy Studcast going. So who won the Slinker versus Jerry Brisco match?
Well, Ron Slinker beat Jerry Brisco, and he retained his Southeastern TV trophy. Austin Idol got disqualified in his match with Jack Brisco for the Southeastern title. Jack got his hand raised. He got the win, but Idol got to keep the belt. The NWA World Title match had all kinds of intrigue in it, man. Austin Idol, as soon as the match was being introduced, showed up at ringside with a camera and a big flash on his camera, taking pictures, taking photos of this world title match. And he started out back from the ring a ways, but as the match proceeded, he got closer and closer to the ring. So at the end of the match, Hulk finally ended up, he got his bear hug on Harley again. Same as the last time they met when Hulk beat him. And Harley, was flailing his arms, and Hulk was a pretty strong dude. I mean, he put that hold on you. You were going to flail your arms and legs and do whatever you could. And so Harley was flailing his arms around, and he hit the referee accidentally. The referee went down, but he wasn't down for very long. But he was down long enough. Idol jumped on the apron of the ring. Hulk still got the bear hug, and he's looking right at Idol, and so Idol snaps one of those photos, that bright flash right in the Hulk's face. Hulk dropped Harley and grabbed his eyes. And Harley just reached up there, schoolboyed him backward over him, and got himself a quick 1, 2, 3.
All right, that's a crazy finish to a world title match. I'm sorry, Stud, but I have yet to see why this big night ended up in such a disaster. Everything so far, except for the Billy Spears thing, seems like it was going pretty well. So what about the attendance? How did you do there?
Now we get to the disaster part of it, Dave. So it was all because of the attendance, basically. This whole evening went sour because of the size of the crowd. And you know how many times I've said that some people were much better, some wrestlers than others, at looking at a crowd and being fairly close to judging pretty much the actual number of people there, within 100 or 200 people, 500 at the very least, even if it was a big crowd. So it was much easier to do that in an arena in which you were accustomed to looking at the same seating each week. You know, like the farm center, you saw it all the time. You could look out there and go, wow, this is a little bigger or it's a little less. But it was a whole new ball game, however, when you started, rather than looking at the farm center indoors, which held about 6,000 people. But when you went outside in a football stadium, you have these two huge concrete grandstands on both sides of the field. They had about 400 ringside chairs on the field and around the ring. Mm-hmm. So, it was trying to figure out how many people are in that is a whole lot of difference. So the next big difference is, too, the building had walls completely around it, and it was very secure when it came to keeping people out and from getting in free. But this was a football field. It's an outside venue. It wasn't nearly as secure as a building was. So when we scheduled this event in that stadium, I asked Charlie Platt, who lived there in Dothan all his life, grew up in Dothan, how many people that Refuse Stadium held. This was back when we booked it, long before this match. And he told me it was about 8,000. And I trusted that was probably an accurate figure. I mean, he'd been there all his life and knew all those football stadiums probably. So that night, there I was sitting at home. I had already wrestled in Knoxville. And we're going to be talking about that in the latter part of this Studcast. We'll get to what happened in Knoxville. But we'd already had the matches in Knoxville. Knoxville was in Eastern time, which meant it was an hour later than in Dothan, which was in Central time. And I knew, man, what the card was there. And I knew that night was possibly going to be a very big night at the box office. And obviously, I'm sitting there, and I'm eagerly awaiting a call from Roy Lee, who handled the box office, about the final count. So when the call finally came, I was told that the ticket count was 7,800 people. Now, that was almost 2,000 more fans than had ever attended a wrestling event in that city. I was pleased with that number. You know, the entire, when you think about it, you're talking 1979, the entire population of Dothan, Alabama was only 50,000 people. And if 8,000 of them showed up, that meant 15% of the people that lived there were in the football stadium that night. So that was one out of every 7 people in the stadium in the city was in that stadium. So yeah, that's a huge percentage of the population of the city.
All right, that sounds great, but so where's the disaster? I still don't see it. What happened?
Well, the disaster came when the next group of calls after Roy Lee came, calls that I was not expecting. The first one was from Louis Toulette, and I could hardly get him to calm down to so I could understand his French. He was not very proficient with English anyway, and he was extremely upset. And he was telling me that he estimated the crowd was way over 10,000, and that some of the wrestlers had already had a meeting, and they were upset with their pay, and that someone had stolen thousands of dollars from not only him but the wrestlers, and that he expected that we were going to lose a lot of wrestlers because of it.
Wow. All right. So, I mean, what made him think that there were that many people there and automatically that somebody had been stealing?
Well, Dave, it's always been a kiss of death, man, to have a huge crowd in a new location like that. That was larger, you know, than the older building was, whatever old. And it wasn't uncommon, especially on these very large crowds, for wrestlers' eyes to get big. And so are the estimates of the crowds, man, to vary, you know. So, you know, everybody has their own idea of how many it is. But, you know, none of them probably knew anything about the football stadium and how many people it held. So I got on the phone immediately with Charlie, one of the guys I trusted the most. And I didn't tell him why I was asking, but I said, how big was the crowd, Charlie? And he said, Ron, if there were about 400 people on the field, and he said if all those 400 people had been sitting in the grandstand along with the rest of it, he said that stadium would have been almost full. And I remembered he told me 8,000 was how much that stadium held, and when we first talked about it, which was months earlier. So much had been put into this event. The Gordon Sully even came to Dothan, went into the ring that night and presented Charlie Platt an award from the National Wrestling Alliance as the best new TV wrestling commentator in America. A lot of things went into this particular event. And we had, including the July 4th Mobile card, and only 2 weeks with the Mobile event and this Dothan event, in 2 events, we drew 20,000 fans. It's really an amazing figure.
Wow.
And this night should have catapulted the company into one of the best wrestling territories in the country. I mean, this should have caught us on fire, literally. And instead, this controversy over the size of the crowd did just the opposite. So basically, my good news kept turning into disaster. Call after call came in that night from wrestlers, man, all with the same complaint. And after at midnight, I stopped taking phone calls because I knew, I wasn't there. What I should have done, Dave, and looking back on this night, is I should have taken myself off the Knoxville card that night, and I should have gone to Dothan and been there. And I probably could have straightened this out, man, if I had been there and been able to see people having a problem with things. I think I probably I would have done better. But as with everything, man, in 1979, this was turning into a kind of a smelly pile of it, man.
Okay.
Instead, this was the high point of Gulf Coast Territory success that year. I mean, we had within 3 weeks 2 shows that did a total of 20,000 people.
Yeah.
And from this point on, because of this controversy over how many people was actually in that football stadium, instead of that territory going crazy, it went just like the Knoxville territory and started in the opposite direction, started going down.
Wow. I'm right. I mean, this has been an absolutely amazing first part of this Studcast. So how much more controversy were you going to be able to take in 1979? All right. So when we get back, we're going to take our break right here. We're going to be back in Tennessee following last Studcast disaster there with a huge makeup card. This Studcast will be back in a moment. Okay, Studcast fans, Ask the Stud 7, the question and answer show on YouTube Southeastern Rewind, has set a new record. The Stud has become a star in a totally new category. He has no limits to what the fans can ask, and his experience in all facets of professional wrestling gives him the answers to unlimited questions. If you have not heard one of these tremendous shows or have not sent in your question, subscribe now at YouTube Southeastern Rewind and send your questions to the post you will find on his social media sites. On Facebook, Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud, or Twitter, Ron Fuller Welch. Saddle up for history. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back. It's the second half of episode number 308. Record crowd becomes disaster. So let's get this Studcast going again. After what we heard in the first part of this one, Stud, I'm almost afraid to go north to Knoxville. So why don't we start with the makeup card for that entire lost evening in the last Studcast were on the same night, Friday, July 27th, 1979, as what we just talked about in Dothan, Alabama, about 500 miles to the south. So how are you going to make up the loss of maybe the best card of the year in the last Studcast?
Well, we were still outside in the amphitheater and going to throw everything we could on this card, see if we could get some momentum back. I mean, gosh, we lost the best card of the year, and we had opportunity to do some things to maybe get some of that momentum back. So we were going to start to feature some new wrestlers in the early matches. And we'd been talking about this, Dick Slater and I, about getting some new guys in the underneath card. And one of those was in the opening match on this card. Now, he wasn't going to become a star this time in Knoxville, but a couple of years later, Lord Jonathan Boyd is going to team up with Crazy Luke Williams in Pensacola's Southeastern Territory, and they're going to become one of the hottest teams in the history of that territory, the New Zealand Sheepherders, man. So Jonathan Boyd is doing his first match ever in Knoxville, facing Dean Ho. Tor Tanaka was wrestling against Ted Allen. United States Junior Heavyweight Championship was on the line. Champion Tony Charles against Eddie Mansfield. The next match was a special challenge match. Dick Slater and Kevin Sullivan against the Mongolian Stomper and Alexis Smirnoff, managed by Gorgeous George Jr. And if Dick Slater's team won, he got 5 minutes alone with Gigi after the match. The first of two main events was for the Southeastern Tag Championship. Robert and I had actually won the tag belts from Tanaka and Fuji in Johnson City, Tennessee, 3 days before that last Friday's card that got rained out. So we were going to be wrestling Tanaka and them the week before, and Tanaka and them were going to be the champions, but we had won the belts on Tuesday. So if that card hadn't rained out, we would have been defending the belts against Tanaka and Fuji. So instead of wrestling against Tanaka and Fuji, we're booked to defend against Jimmy Golden, and he's got a mystery partner. So to top the card off, we were bringing back the third annual $10,000 pole battle royal because it didn't happen the week before. It was going to happen on this card.
All right, so it really sounds like another great card, and fans were going to still get the pole battle royal. That's pretty cool. So what was on the TV show to set it all up?
But since there had not been any matches the night before, because the show had rained out, there was no videos for us to use, which we like to do videos in the program. It always added something to it. But there was only going to be one in this, and thank goodness we had taped that Johnson City match in which Rob and I won the championship. So the TV opened up with a tag match. Dick Slater and Kevin Sullivan ran roughshod, man, over a couple of overmatched heels. Slater was at the top of his game, and so was Kevin, man. And they made a pretty good team, these guys. And during that match, Gigi came to the set, and he complained to Les about this special stipulation in their tag match. And he wanted to know why Slater is going to get an opportunity to have 5 minutes with me by myself. What's the reasoning behind that? And then he finally ended up getting so upset, he just said, I'll tell you what, Slater's going to regret this. He'll be sorry for this. So then the second TV match was for the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship. Tony Charles wrestling and defending his belt on TV. We're in the rating period month still. And and he's going to be defending him against a very tough opponent, Mr. Fuji. So Eddie Mansfield, who would be going to get a chance at the belt the following Friday night, he went and joined Les at the set. And and if Charles actually beat Fuji, on this TV match, he's going to get his first shot ever at the U.S. Junior Heavyweight Championship. So he talked about Mansfield talked about how long he'd been waiting for a shot at that belt. And then he made a prediction that next week, on the next Saturday, he's going to be the United States Junior Heavyweight Champion. But he's watching this match, and when it started looking like Mr. Fuji's going to beat Charles, right? It was a very competitive match, between these guys. They were both great wrestlers, and two of the best in the world. And the studio audience was really into it, man. And it ended with a 15-minute time limit draw. Mansfield, though, had left the set, and he was down banding on the apron of the ring for Charles to win. Go, don't lose, don't lose, don't lose. I want to make my shot to win the belt. And so it ended up a draw, and, that was it was pretty rare.
Yeah, that was kind of, I'd say, very rare. A heel actually cheering on a baby face. So, all right. So what about the personality profile? Who was on that?
Well, my brother and I, and we joined Les at the profile set, and we had all our belts, and we're going to be in the last match on TV, so we wore our belts on the profile, and sat down in the chairs there, and the fans in the studio. When we came out with the belts on, they had no idea that we were the champions. Things had changed dramatically, and then we had missed that last Friday night because of the rain. So there we were, first time they had a chance, a lot of them, to see that we were the tag champions. So because, Les started out by asking us about our father. How's your dad doing? Because of the injury he had. And, a lot of fans, I'm sure, were curious about the same thing. It was really thoughtful of him. And so then we watched the only video, like I said, of a recorded match from the week before. We didn't get our Friday night in and didn't get to record any matches. So our victory over Tanaka and Fuji 4 days earlier, right up there in the Tri-Cities area, northeastern part of Tennessee, which is Bristol, Johnson City, and Kingsport. We got to show the fans how we won the belts. And after the video ended, then Les asked us, he said, guys, y'all are already here. He goes, I got to ask you if you would please stay and watch this interview. He said, I recorded this before anybody came into the studio. He said, Jimmy Golden came to me and he asked me if I would record something to be put on TV. And he says, I want you guys to see this, and he says, it's all about this upcoming title defense. You guys are going to be defending against Jimmy Golden and his mystery partner. So Jimmy, man, at this point, he was at the top of his game. I mean, he was obviously loving being a heel for the first time in his career. So he opened it up laughing like crazy, and then he asked us, he says, how's Uncle Buddy? Is he still bedridden?
Oh, God.
The opening line. And the fans, they responded with boos like he was right there live in the studio. They popped like, wow, boy, what an ass you are, man. So then he continued from there, and he told us, he said, you better shine up those belts real good. He says, because 6 days from now, he says, me and my mystery partner, we're going to leave the ring with him. And then he said, I got a real big surprise for you guys and the fans. And he said, he said, I put your old man to pasture, man, with a back injury. But he said, I got a different plan for you two boys. He said, we're going to both of you guys are going to see red, and lots of it, because we never treated him as an equal. He said, you guys never treated me as a part of the family. I was always, pushed to the side and looked over and, treated badly. And then he says, and you know how the old saying goes, when I'm talking about red, blood is thicker than water. And so, he left a lot of little worry about what the heck he was really saying. And then he ended up by saying, fans better get ready. He said, because all hell's going to break loose here now.
Do you think anyone had any idea who his partner was going to be?
Well, that was kind of the beauty of this angle, man. His partner had not wrestled in southeastern Knoxville in 4 years. So
Wow.
this guy is going to show up, not been there for 4 years, and nobody knows who he is. So
Interesting.
I know.
Yeah.
And I mean, we knew obviously, but the
Right.
fans don't know. And wow, the guy, they're gonna, he's, well, he's got his plan. Let's put it that way.
That's cool. All right. And somebody we hadn't seen for 4 years. So you knew the fans were really going to be digging that maybe. All right. So what about the third TV match? Who was in that?
Well, the Mongolian Stomper and Alexis Smirnoff, they're in a tag match managed by Gigi against Slater and Sullivan. They were in that match, and Slater and Sullivan went to the set with Les. And Slater tore into Gigi, man. He asking Sullivan, he says to Kevin, if you can just keep everybody off of me and I get that 5 minutes with Gigi, he goes, we'll never have to worry about him again because I'm going to send him to the hospital. So he was all really, if we get this win, I get 5 minutes, just keep them off my back. So then the last match on the show was Rob and I. And we wore our belts to the ring. And the studio was ready, man. And so were we, to give them something big, especially after they got that letdown, man, with that rain from the week before. And so we ended a wild match by both of us putting a fuller leg lock on each one of the guys we were wrestling. And the studio was obviously loving that, man. But the problem was that, when you got the fuller leg lock, you're laying on your back, you got your legs all tangled up with another guy, and you're not going to be able to get up very fast. So as soon as we put these leg locks on them, then here came Jimmy Golden. And he let everybody know who his mystery partner was 6 days early before he was scheduled, Norvell Austin, and came exploding in the studio with Golden, and they stomped Rob and I into the mat because we can't get up. And then Jimmy jerked me up and he held me, and that cannonball-headed Norvell Austin, who had the hardest head, man, I've ever seen,
I know.
headbutted me into oblivion.
Wow.
Bloodshot everywhere. Wow, it just cracked my skull. And then they got Rob up, did the same thing, maybe even worse to him. And they left us both laying and bleeding. And we had taken our belts, wore our belts in the ring. We left our belts in the corner. They stole the belts, and they left the building. Jimmy was, true to his word about us seeing red, man. We saw a lot of red. We saw it right then. And then his devil, he said all hell was going to break loose. Well, obviously Norvell was his devil. And, wow, things were going to get hot in Southeastern.
Wow, what an amazing ending to a TV show. So did you and Rob make an interview on the end of the show, or what happened?
Well, Jimmy and them, time was running short, about to run out of time. So, we're still there. And down in the ring, several of the other baby faces came to the ring. They brought towels, and they were trying to get the bleeding stopped. We were both bleeding pretty bad. And so Jimmy and them, on their way out of the studio carrying the belts, stopped by the desk with Les, and they took our interview time. So, well, we really got a bad deal on this one.
Okay, so that was an impactful way to end the show. It had to have gone a long way in making up for that disastrous rainout maybe the night before. So how about the next Friday night?
Well, Dean Ho won over Jonathan Boyd. Tor Tanaka got the best of Ted Allen. Tony Charles successfully defended his United States junior heavyweight belt against Eddie Mansfield. Mansfield was wrong about walking out and beating Tony Charles. Not many people could beat Tony Charles. Dick Slater won the tag match with his partner Kevin Sullivan. They beat the Mongolian Stomper and Alexis Smirnoff, and he got his 5 minutes with Gorgeous George Jr. And Kevin stayed at ringside, right? And well, the fans were happy about that. Slater was taking care of business. He was starting to crank into really kicking Gorgeous George's rear end. And all of a sudden, Kevin Sullivan jumps in the ring and attacks Slater. And then the Stomper and Smirnoff joined Slater, and they beat the heck out of us. They came in and joined Sullivan, and they all three beat Slater until he had to be carried out on the stretcher.
Wow, there a lot going on that night. So I mean, really not expected, was it?
Well, they sure didn't, and the crowd certainly didn't, and that was always good. When nobody expected stuff, it meant that it got over, and people were just stunned. They were like, "Wow, what the heck is Kevin Sullivan doing?" So there's a lot of intrigue going on here, and so Rob and I had our belts returned to us on that Friday night, early in the night. We sent over there. They sent the belts to us because we were champions, and then we kept them. We won the match against Golden and Norvell. Basically, it was a double disqualification in both teams, but there was a lot more blood in this one, but it wasn't all our blood this time. So it was a little bit different than Jimmy had predicted it was going to be. And then Robert ended up winning the $10,000 pole battle royal at the end of the night.
Wow, so it sounds like you may have been able to get back some of that momentum lost on the rain out the Friday before. So what was the attendance? How'd you guys do that night?
Well, it was 3,000. It was one of the best crowds since the war started, and probably because of the way the TV show ended the Saturday before with both of us bleeding, and the fact that this was a pole battle royal on this card, as well as the card that didn't happen. And we're going to be, we were really, really, really happy with the 3,000 to see it, but it was not near what it could have been if we hadn't have had that rain the week before. I think we had talked last week. We were expecting as many as 5,000. So we were happy with the 3, but we wished we hadn't had the rain, and I'd love to have seen what that one would have been.
Wow. All right. How did the Knoxville 5, the All-Stars, I guess you'd say the guys across town, do? How'd they do the next night?
Well, I have no idea, man, as usual, about what their card was. But my usual crowd spotter that went to their events, and he always called me and told me what he thought the crowd was. He said it was probably about 1,000 people, maybe a little less, but somewhere around 1,000.
All right, when he would call you, was that information you wanted to know, or is there also a part of you that just didn't want to know?
Well, that whole situation was one of those that you do I or don't I?
Right.
Do I really want to get it, or do I not really want to hear what it was?
Yeah.
So it became kind of during the whole course of this war that this guy would give me these numbers, and it didn't make me feel better most of the time, and sometimes it didn't make me feel worse either.
But I would think that it probably you recognize they're not growing.
Yeah, they had a very, very difficult time growing it above 1,000.
Just really,
they had very few crowds that were over 1,000.
Yeah.
So I would have been very disappointed if he'd have said they got 3,000.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I went to your crowd last night and they had just as much as you.
Right.
That would have really hurt me.
So it's kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't as far as listening to the information, but then at the same time a little rewarding knowing that the thing that they're trying to put together is not working so far. Okay, Stud, so we're running out of time, but I think you wanted to talk about something new the All-Stars had come up with that wasn't going to help the war. What about that?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me, Dave. I wanted to talk about in the beginning of the war, we talked about this. Certain things needed to be avoided in one of these wars if you were going to save your territory, basically, and And the war was being handled in such a way as not to destroy wrestling in that part of the country. If they had avoided some of these things, but if both sides totally ignored each other, in the end, then when the war was over, one way or the other, the territory and its fans might still appreciate the sport. These wrestling wars made the fans just kind of get disappointed and disenchanted with the whole thing. They didn't want to support even anybody, basically. Mm-hmm. And so we had tried to totally ignore them. But that hope was dashed, man, when I saw this new one that they threw on us during the course of this week. And it was a horrible idea. It was to challenge on TV, and they were running their newspaper ads now again. They were challenging us on TV and in their newspaper ads with one of their wrestlers challenging one of our wrestlers. Okay? And for instance, as an example, let's say Ronnie Garvin would challenge the Mongolian Stomper to show up at their matches on a Saturday night, and that he would pay him $5,000 if he beat Ronnie Garvin. So obvious to the fan, that sounded good, and I'm sure some of them showed up there and paid their money to see that. You know, they was wondering, is that going to happen, right? But if you think a little deeper on this, man, why would I allow one of my stars to go to their show at all, and especially accept a challenge when the mere fact that he showed up at their show is going to help them to draw better than they normally would, right?
Right.
And it's going to make fans think if you ever went there and did that, then they're going to think it's going to happen again and again. So basically, I'd be using my wrestlers to build their company, right? I mean, but it was a horrible idea for them, and it didn't. It was just part of the war and part of the horrible things that made it so terrible.
To me, an act of desperation, I think, is what that was. And maybe that was happening every week for them, an act of desperation. It's been another great one, Ron. All of this war, and now what's going on down south is proving to be one of the most significant and interesting stories in the history of wrestling. All right, and listen, I wish we could. We were on a roll, but no time for a learning tree this week. But it has certainly been a learning tree experience. So where do we ride next week, Ron?
Well, we're headed into August, man, in 1979. And in southeastern Knoxville, up north there we're going to be another strong card. Basically, we're going to try to attempt to hold up the size of this week's crowd, to keep that 3,000, to grow above 3,000. The next card, we're going to have all the fans talking, because Jimmy Golden is nowhere to be seen on the card. And, Jimmy at this point, he had a tremendous amount of heat, and the fans watched this card, and when it was read down by Les at least 2 times in the show, I'm sure fans were going, where the heck is Jimmy Golden? So then after Kevin's turn on Dick Slater, sent Kevin Sullivan on the other side, to the heel side, like Golden, for the first time in Kevin's career. So Jimmy had turned heel for the first time in his career. Mm-hmm. And 2 weeks later, Kevin Sullivan turns heel for the first time in his career. Now, Sullivan's future as a heel is going to become legendary. I'm telling you, he is going to, in the Florida territory in the 80s, Kevin Sullivan is going to be the heel for that territory. So in the month of August, down up in Knoxville, we're going to see 2 wrestlers have their heads shaved in 1 month. Then Southeastern Gulf Coast, the legacy of this Dothan record crowd, man, and the disaster that followed it, man, that's going to take business down faster than a leg dive, man. I'm telling you. Andre is going to return in August. Blackwell is going to start to make a name for himself in southeastern Gulf Coast, especially in his battles with Ox Baker. Then they've got 2 tremendous teams that are headed for a legendary run, the Samoans and the Assassins against each other. That's going to be a tremendous, tremendous run. And but like everything in 1979, man, where bad news never ends, more bad news on the war was coming because the war is going to come to the Gulf Coast territory.
Wow. Wow.
So hopefully next week we'll have time for another learning tree question, my man. Sorry about it this week, folks, but but there's so much going on. It's hard to get it all in, Dave.
Oh, no doubt. Every time I think things are going to get better, Ron, you give us so many new things to think about. I don't know how anyone in wrestling could have had an as interesting or difficult a year as you in the notorious year known as 1979. So the strange thing is, I can't wait to hear about it again next week. And folks, on Facebook, go to Ron Fuller Welch, the Tennessee Stud on Facebook. Like him and follow him there to become friends with a living legend on Facebook. Same thing on Twitter. Ron Fuller Welch, follow him there too. Check out his fantastic website. It's tnstud.com, tnstud.com, for every Studcast ever done, 43 Super Studcast. Ron's Stud Store is there. All kinds of souvenirs in the Stud Store, including his thrilling lion novel called Brutus. You can get yours personally autographed. You can get that done too. Plus, Ron's YouTube Southeastern Rewind is red hot. It has more than 310 videos. You could spend days and days and days and still not see them all. The last 87 Studcast are there, including this one. 52 stud stories and now 56 short rides with the stud. And the brand new Ask the Stud 7 question and answer show has just been posted. You got to check it out. Subscribe now at YouTube Southeastern Rewind and see the best in old school wrestling absolutely free. All right, any closing comments, Stud?
Well, as always, Dave, I want to thank all our wonderful fans out there. Wow, we got some great fans, and I hope everybody has enjoyed this one today. And I hope they're going to come back and listen to the next Studcast. And please take care of yourselves and others. May God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at David Summers Productions at gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC. Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud. 1, 2, 3. This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.